joining us online. Dr. Monojit is a professor of natural language processing and has previously served as the principal researcher at Microsoft Research India. He holds a PhD in computer science from IIT and specializes in cultural competence in LLMs, multilingual NLP, computational social linguistics, and responsible AI development. Thank you for joining us today, sir. Um, you, uh, you can share your slides.
Okay, yeah. First of all, thanks a lot for organizing this very timely and important, event, because I think there is a lot more discussion required on this, and you are taking the lead in India. So that's my something very inspiring, and I have been really looking forward to what all very interesting thing you do in India, because I feel the scope of this whole space in India is tremendous. For some of the reasons I will describe, but even otherwise. A quick question. Does my Zoom window overlap with the slides, or the slides are fine, all visible?
The slides are fine, sir.
But we do not have your video, sir. I mean, I don't know if it's intentional.
No, I have
So we do
on
not
my
see you.
video.
We see you now.
Okay, so actually my camera slider was off, so I didn't notice that. Okay. Yeah, so what I'm going to talk about is what are the sort of picking up from the last discussion, that what are the more advanced things that we can do with AI and in the mental health space. And since they are more interesting and more advanced, naturally they come up with bigger ethical issues. And I'm going to talk about those. Unfortunately, right, I don't have an answer to the question you asked, that is the situation bleak? I will hopefully try to portray a more desirable and hopeful future. Nevertheless, there are definitely big risks that one must address. So with that, let me first talk about my entry to this field. I have been working mostly in NLP, and for some time back in, I think, 2018, I actually started working also on mental health. And incidentally, it was a collaboration with NIMHANS, somebody called Dr. Seema Mehrotra. And it was about looking at peer-to-peer conversations on forums and what problems, can, in those days we didn't have LLMs, so can NLP techniques identify issues with those conversations and then intervene, saying that, okay, now is the time for the moderator to come in, or this content may not be good to show to somebody, and things like that. Unfortunately, the answer was mostly negative, especially if you see the diverse context in which people are using these peer-to-peer forums. It was very difficult beyond English for any language to build something reasonable. But the study yielded quite a bit of interesting findings about what people discuss, what these networks look like at scale. We were working with 7 cups. There were two data sets. One is 7 cups, and the other one I'm somehow unable to recollect at this moment. But more recently, I started taking this more interest in this space simply because I think AI is so advanced now that we can do a lot of things. In 2018, I would say it was in its infancy. So we were trying to do something which AI could not solve at that time. But now we have a lot of opportunities. And coincidentally, there was a Dutch Tool seminar just last month on NLP and mental health, where Asim and I both were there, and many other people were there. You can see some half of the people were psychologists, psychiatrists, and the other half were computer scientists coming either from natural language processing or human-computer interaction side, both of which are of interest. By the way, one very well-known name in this area is Professor Munmunde Choudhury, who is in Georgia Tech, who is also our collaborator in a lot of projects. And she was there in this meeting, and she encouraged me to, use my, so I also paint, so use my paintings in the talks. So this talk, which I made for Dutch Tool, I use a lot of my paintings, things like this, which will appear at various places. I hope they are not distractions. Okay, so why did I go to Dutchtool, or what excites me right now is this project about loneliness and chatbots. So this is with Asim, a bunch of other people from MBZUAI, Professor Thamar Solorio, my colleague, and also Munmun's team. And here the question we are asking is, like it or not, people are going to chatbots and talking about their mental health issues. It's not about whether people should go and talk to chatbots. Should there be AI therapists? That question is moot because people are already doing it, and there is enough evidence for it. So then the question is how a chatbot should deal with it. And as you can imagine, when people go and talk to chatbots, chatbots are not therapists. They are not experts in the mental health domain. So they usually respond in a way that will hook the user to chat more because that's how they are trained. The monetary benefit of a conversation agent is to increase engagement. So they want to increase engagement. But especially for loneliness, do you think a chatbot should increase engagement? Because then the person is more isolated from their immediate surrounding and talking only to the chatbot more and more. So these are great questions, and we looked at the literature. There is no answer to it because chatbots are pretty recent phenomenon. People have looked at what happens in the digital space when people go and talk, but that is very different from chatbots because digital space still might have another person. Some of the problems are similar, but not all the issues, and chatbot poses newer issues. So in this project, what we aim to do is first identify various types of loneliness conversations which chatbots might have to deal with, have a taxonomy of that. So this goes back to yesterday's very interesting conversation with Professor Sanjeev Jain and others, like which I only attended 2 sessions because I was traveling. But there we talked about classification systems. And we discussed whether we need a different classification system for different culture and things like that. I would argue, I don't know about culture, but the mental health classification systems are going to completely change in the coming decade because of these, integration of AI in our daily life. And more in upcoming years, there will be more virtual reality, right? Not only like text-based chatbot, but your whole world will be virtual. So in those worlds, what is the definition of loneliness? What is the definition of depression? What are the different kinds of expressions of loneliness? Everything has to be redefined from scratch. So in some sense, as a researcher, we should all feel excited. There is a lot to do in the coming years. But one might also worry about the future of humanity. I'm not going that direction. That's a more philosophical, different conversation. We should have it at some time. But today I'm more about the exciting part of it, right? How can we use AI to study these ill effects of or problematic issues of AI itself? So I'm not going to talk more about loneliness simply because we have just started doing the work. Instead, I will talk about something else, which is about AI therapists and AI patient simulations, where I have worked a little bit, and I will give an example of that. But other peoples are also working on it, so I will mostly try to connect my work to some of the recent work that's happening in the field. So let me begin with a story. This is the story of Ruth, a 6-year-old boy, let's say from Bangalore. And Ruth's teacher observed that his behavior when he started going to Montessori school, he was, let's say, 3 years, 4 years old. They observed some issues with his behavior, and they suggested for a thorough, assessment. Maybe there is some speech delay or something. The assessment was done. His parents took him to some local assessment center. After the assessment, let's say the result came something like his social communication skills are delayed, but everything else is fine. Just wait and watch. It should be all okay. Uh, Fast forward maybe 5, 6 more years. So Ruth is now 12 years old, and there are again some issues in school. So school started complaining that, oh, Ruth is not communicating well with the friends. And as time progresses, parents also noticed that he was a different child, different kind of child. So the parents decided to take him to one of the top, child and adolescent psychology clinics in Bangalore for an assessment. Now, what happens is the diagnosis, like a lot of instruments are given for testing, like typical psychological instruments used. Ruth fills it up, parents fills it up. They look at everything and decide, look at it and say, oh, he has high functional autism. Earlier, we used to call it Asperger's syndrome, but now we call it high functional autism. Some numbers like something point, something, something like classification, and so on and so forth. Okay, diagnosis done. What's next? Okay, we will offer 8 therapy sessions and wait and watch, based on what happens. The first therapy session, uh, a very talented young psychologist trained from the US, she tries to, talk to Ruth, and Ruth doesn't say a single word. At the end of the 1 hour or so session, the therapist talks to Ruth's parents saying that, look, he cannot speak, so I cannot do any therapy. First, take him to a speech therapist. His parents were puzzled because Ruth can speak, at least to them. So they spoke to Ruth, asked, hey, why didn't you speak to that person? You did not even answer a single question. Ruth's answer was, oh, I didn't like that person. She looks Indian, her accent is American, sounded very alien to me. I didn't want to talk to her. Okay, so Ruth's parents took him to found out, let's say, one speech therapist and took to a speech therapist. The speech therapist was more like local, typically dressed Kannadiga woman. And somehow Ruth suddenly felt very comfortable with that person. He opened up a little bit more. And then that person's diagnosis was, no, he has no speech problem. Actually, he has pragmatic issues. He doesn't know when to speak and when not to speak. It's not a speech like syntax or semantics problem, or a basic speech processing problem. So take him to a person who can give that kind of communication therapy, and suggested one person. There again for 6 months, the therapy happened. Fortunately, Ruth responded well. But at the end of 6 months, this therapist says, sorry, I think I cannot help you here because Ruth is very intelligent, very smart. Every task I give him, he solves it without, uttering only monosyllables because he knows how to get his job done with only yes and no. He doesn't say anything more. So he's very intelligent, but unfortunately, I can't help you. And then the story continues in this way. Ruth, they take them to more psychotherapists and other, people who specialize in autism. But nothing, unfortunately, has helped in this case. And Ruth's parents were also very puzzled because there were other people. I mean, ASD turns out to be a very common thing these days, and there are many people who suffer from it. And they know that many children with this, who are on the spectrum, get a lot of benefit, from these therapies and other things. So the question was, they were puzzled why in Ruth's case, nothing is changing or nobody has even a clue what needs to be done. So before we jump into, we'll continue our story. For this audience, probably it's moot to talk about these things, but maybe they're, still to bind it together. Let me quickly say a couple of things about ASD. So ASD is, of course, very, very prevalent. Recently, some news from US said, every fourth child has either ASD or ADHD. Now, is it a rise in diagnosis or rise in cases itself, or maybe probably both has to play a role, and so on. The other problem with ASD is, of course, it's a spectrum, so there are too many things happening. And the interesting bit for me is this, that in 2025, this article came in Nature Genetics, which says, trying to classify the heterogeneity of autism into, phenotypic and genetic system. And I'm not getting again into the classification system, but looking at the paper, what one clearly sees is we don't even understand ASD that well, And this was reinforced when I spoke to psychologists in Dutch tool. Many of them said, no, ASD, why did you take, psychotherapy is not the thing in ASD at all. Like, it is not about giving any psychotherapy. So the people, the story doesn't make sense because ASD is a very different thing. And first of all, we don't even understand it. And maybe the therapies, the program should be for parents of Ruth rather than Ruth himself, because Ruth will be what he is. It is not going to change. It's his parents who have to know how to deal with this thing. His professional environment needs to know. So there seems to be a lot of confusion here already, right? And apparently ADHD. This is something again you guys know better. Somebody told me that ADHD is now included in typical psychology courses, clinical training courses, but ASD is still not a part of it, not a mandatory part of it. People separately specialize in ASD. So policies also need to change. So they pointed out those kind of issues. And of course, the research gap is there. But coming back to even otherwise about psychotherapy, not only Ruth's story of ASD in particular, the problem seems to me as an outsider to the field is the diversity of cases in mental health is tremendous. Like pressure, again, taking example from yesterday, like you have a sphygmomanometer, which can measure pressure. You have blood tests that can measure hemoglobin and all, which are precise measurements. And also the human ranges are more common across populations, etc., although there is variation too. However, when it comes to mental health, neither we have such good measurements, and nor there is such uniformity around the population. In some sense, every case is different, and ASD, hits the nail on its head, because ASD by definition is a spectrum, simply because we don't understand it. Every case is so different. So then how do a therapist operate? What makes a good therapist in such a case? Um, my hunch will be two things. First is experience. More cases you have seen and more relevant similar experiences you have seen, over time you learn how to advise each and every case, right? Of course, there are protocols that somebody picks up in college and all, but beyond that, right, when you are practicing. The second thing is creativity. When you get like very new cases, one has to be also very creative. And on the other hand, access is another problem. As you would see in, Ruth's story, his parents were in a big city, were very educated, were trying to take him to the best places, but still was unable to get the right therapist, connect to the right therapist. And issues like that, what accent the therapist speaks, how the therapist looks like, all these are so important. You guys know again much better than me that in psychotherapy it's not about what is the therapy, but also who, as much as who is giving the therapy. So uh, all this makes a great use case for AI, because both experience-wise and creativity-wise, as well as number of people we can train, we will be always very limited. And can AI fortify it? So here is a suggestion, an idea. And I will try to open up a can of worms with this idea and make you all excited. So imagine there is this child, let's say Ruth, and then based on the background and the history, based on the background and the history and some signals, some behavioral signals like conversations or something, whatever is needed, we create an LLM, which is a digital twin of this, individual. Digital twin in the sense that when a particular intervention is tried on this twin, digital twin, the outcome of that intervention would be similar as if when the intervention was given to the original, the actual child. So in that sense, that is the response of the twin, and the response to the of the child to the intervention should be similar. So as long as we can create this, we would call it a digital twin. Doesn't mean it has to replicate every behavior of the child. Now, once we have the digital twin, I can actually simulate a huge number of interventions without worrying about time, cost, and I don't have to be correct. I can be very, creative, very outrageous, very silly. Really doesn't matter. It's a digital twin on which I'm trying a lot of these different interventions. I can combine various interventions. There will be a combinatorial explosion, but it's like computation. So I can probably systematically explore the whole space of interventions. Once I have done this, based on that, the system can find some interventions which seem to have worked on the digital twin. So these are the suggested interventions. And now there is a therapist who looks at these suggested interventions. And of course, the therapist has the control or the agency to decide whether to take them or leave them. And the therapist finally takes what the therapist thinks is useful or maybe modify them and provides it to the child. And then it happens in an iteration. As the therapist, counsels the child and the child progresses, the system get further signals of behavior, and the digital twin also is modified, and then new interventions are tried, and therapist is again given feedback. And this loop continues. So note that very important point here is the therapy is still given by a human. So we are not talking of LLM therapist here, which I will in a moment show you that many people are already talking about that. But what I'm talking about is some sandboxing or experimentation, ground, which will inform the therapist. And the question is, can we make this kind of digital twins? What would be the technical challenges? What will be the ethical challenges, potential ethical challenges? Now, before we get further into those ethical and technical challenges, let me also quickly tell you that people have been already thinking about it. I would like to just call out two specific studies, two groups. One is in Stanford University, Professor D. Young. So she was one of the organizers of the Dutch tool. And what they are trying to do is they are trying to use this digital, they don't call it a digital twin, they call it more like canonical patient models. So imagine you have 10, a classification system which has 10 different types of depression, 20 different types of ADHD, and so on. For each of these, you collect canonical signals and use those signals to create canonical patient models using LLMs, and let the therapist, human therapist, learn by talking to these patient models. Now, and there can be, the teachers or trainers of the therapist who can look at those conversations and give further feedback to the therapist, to the trainee therapist. Apparently, today this happens by role playing. So in psychology students who are being trained to be therapists, they do this role playing game. Somebody acts as the patient, somebody as the therapist. First of all, these are limited in scope, and these are also limited by how good a role the other person can play. So with this kind of thing, it can be scaled and a lot of good training can be done. They did a big RCT and showed some advantage of this in certain cases. So, but this is I mean, just the beginning, right? They have lots of plans, and I'm part of some of these ideas that they are exploring. The other work that I want to talk about is from University of Washington, and this is Professor Tim Althoff. Incidentally, the Nimhan's work that I was talking about in 2017-18 that I did was with Ashish. He was a research fellow at Microsoft Research at that time, and Tim was also a collaborator. We have some papers together. So Tim Althoff, he has been looking at a even more digital twin-like idea. So what he is saying is, I build LLM therapist first. And this is his idea that LLMs can provide therapy, but to build LLM therapists and to evaluate them, what I do is I do digital patients. So again, they are not talking of exact digital twins. So their main focus is LLM therapist and building good LLM therapists and evaluating them. And the idea is that these LLM therapists will be tested on a bank of digital patients, and then their efficacy will be measured over multi-turn conversation. Again, lots of confounders here, lots of complications because we don't know how to evaluate multi-turn conversation. This might be news to some of you. We have built such big conversation agents. There is not a single, evaluation framework for multi-turn conversation. We know only how to, I mean, currently people have worked on only how to evaluate single turn conversation or maybe 2, 3 turns. But if you go beyond, right, therapy sessions will be very long. And not only multi-turn conversations, but multi-conversations over conversation sessions. How to track things over that, how to evaluate efficacy over that is something totally new to the field. And this was one of the discussion area also in Daksh tool, that how we build those aspects. Okay, so as we see, there is already a lot of work that's being done where people have been trying to create digital models of patients. Maybe not exactly digital twin, maybe canonical models, but nevertheless patient models and also therapists. So the question then that bothers me is how accurately and equitably LLMs can reproduce diverse human behavior. Because we just now talked, when I was telling you the story of Ruth, I very clearly, I mean, it seems like the problem is the diversity. The problem is it's such a complex and diverse space, how to navigate and through it and make a model of it. So are LLMs any better than humans, right? This would be a question, good question to ask. And this is where my research comes into play. So um, today, so I have been looking at this culture space quite a bit. And let me first tell you something interesting, which Professor Sanjeev Jain mentioned in a different way yesterday. He said culture is useless, or I mean, he didn't, that's not his word, but he tried to dismiss this whole notion of culturally specific classification theory, and that doesn't work. And he hinted at the point that, at the end, a person from Bengal lives in Bangalore and is depressed. Should I assume that they are Bengali? Should I assume they are a Bangalorean? How do I treat a person? What culture they belong to? What framework I use? So this is exactly the conclusion I reached when I started working with culture. So usually for AI, we try to see what kind of behavior, when we try to evaluate AI models, we try to talk about the normative behavior. What is the capital of India? New Delhi. Where is Nimhan's headquarters located? Bangalore. So these are very factual questions, and the answers I gave are normative answers. Maybe if you ask each and every person in the world, they will not give this normative answer, even for such a factual question. Many people will say, I don't know what is the capital of India. Many people will not say New Delhi, will just say Delhi, right? So there is variation already with such factual answers. And when you talk of more complex behaviors, like people's preferences, values, and all this, you can imagine the amount of diversity is so much that asking about normative behavior is a foolish thing. So then, instead of universal normative behavior prediction, which is what most of NLP has been trying to look at, people started looking at, people including myself, researchers like myself, looking at culture specific behavior. So let's say Africa is a continent, and I try to say, okay, current models are biased, Anglocentric, Western, they cannot represent Africa, they cannot represent South Asia, and so on. Great starting point, but that's not a great stopping point for multiple reasons. First of all, when we talk of behaviors of South Asia or behaviors of Africa, they are itself stereotypes. There is so much of diversity. These are like huge continents or subcontinents. There is so much difference. But forget about that, right? Even talking about Bangalore, are two Bangaloreans' behavior same? So calling that Bangaloreans love filter coffee is a big stereotype. Maybe on average, yes, a lot of people might like it, but it is a stereotyping nevertheless. So can we come beyond stereotyping? So culture is all about stereotyping if you think of it that way. So then the question is, can I model an individual's behavior? This goes back to, as you can see, the digital twin part. This also goes back to in our field, like computer science and IT, we call it the personalization problem. So and you can imagine that if an LLM or any system have to serve me and give the best customer possible service to me, then it needs to be customizable and personalizable. It's true for everything, right? When I go to a hospital, when I go to a travel agent, I need a personalized and customized service. That's what I look forward to. That's the best case scenario. And what I would argue is with LLMs, this is possible. This is totally possible if we can overcome some of these ethical issues. But of course, there are technical challenges. So we can ask this question today, which was harder to ask earlier. So let me give first an example of a work, very quickly, a case study that we tried to do in this field to see where LLMs are today with this problem. So to that end, we took a particular use case for which data collection was ethically not problematic and was slightly easier. So imagine you are a 13-year-old girl from Ethiopia is reading it has come to India and is exploring restaurants and reading a review of a restaurant. The review reads something like this. You don't want to miss the gujia at the rabri from this place, which will surely remind you of childhood Holi. Now, of course, there are many things which this person does not understand coming from Ethiopia. So, if there were a system which could identify these things, like maybe Gujia Rabri remind you of childhood Holi, that's a lived experience. Gujia Rabri are specific concepts which this person may not know, and even certain usage like Vana and all this person may not know. So a model might be able to explain it, right? Like first identify it and second explain it, but explain it in a way that will make it clear to you. So for instance, like Holi is a festival similar to Meskel. So Meskel is an Ethiopian festival. By the way, I didn't write it, GPT generated it. And I didn't verify it with any Ethiopian, so I don't know whether they are correct or not. So similarly, Gujia is a fried sweet like Dabo Kolo. So something of that sort. So we wanted to make this kind of a system. We call it culturally yours. It's a cross-cultural reading assistant. So it's like a browser plugin which you can quickly download, and when you download it, it asks you some questions like what country you are from, how old you are, what kind of environment you grew up in, and so on. And with these questions, it tries to start guessing. But of course, once it guesses, it might be right or wrong, right? You might be from India, but you might know a lot about sushi, different types of sushi. Doesn't mean Indians, I mean, most Indians may not know, but some Indians might. So it requires that personalization. So you can give that feedback of what you know and what I mean, suppose it identified something as you don't know, you can say, no, sorry, I know this. And you can also highlight something like, look, I don't know this. Based on that feedback that you provide, it personalizes. So user can give this feedback by selecting or deselecting the model's suggestions. I'm not talking about how this works. There is a LLM agent, couple of LLM agents working at the behind. But for all LLM agents, right, like for all LLM agent-based systems, it's as good as the LLMs are. So we tried a couple of LLMs, Llama, GPT, etc., and evaluated them on this problem for Goodreads review. So I'm skipping, in the interest of time, I'm skipping the details of the experiments. I can go on into those during the Q&A period. But let me talk about, let me come straight away to the results. I think this is the most interesting observation. So let me first explain you the lower graph plots. So we took people from 3 countries, India, Mexico, and USA, who took part in our survey. And what this diagram shows is inter-annotator agreement. Higher means uh, two people agree more to each other. So two Indians, so if you look at the last row, right, human to human. So if you give this task of what you don't understand, how often two Indians agree with each other? It looks like this is around 14%, which means the behavior has a lot of variation. It's nowhere close to 100%, not even 50%, right? And this is true for all countries. Mexico, USA even a little less because USA seems to be more diverse, right? More heterogeneous. So only 11%. So people agree much less. Now, when you ask models to guess, models behavior is in, so this is like how better or worse compared to chance agreement, and it is negative, right? So it is worse than the chance agreement. In fact, models have the opposite bias somehow. All models, right? These are different models that we tried, aya, gamma, GPT-4o, and so on, with humans. However, you see models, when you compare with models, right? Gemma was asked to simulate an Indian over a document, and Aya was also asked to do that. How well Gemma and Aya would agree? They agree a huge lot of time, 48%, 45%, and so on, right? And this is true across geographies. What it means is LLMs are reproducing a stereotypical behavior in the name of that country. By the way, we gave a lot more information than only country. So I'm presenting the result with Indians together, but when we simulate the experiment, we tell the LLM more details like is the person coming from rural or urban setting, is the person, what's the age, what's the gender, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot more information if the LLM wanted to use it and model it, right? So LLMs are stereotyping, and the stereotyping is so strong, right? Because human-human agreement is already very less. It goes on to say, show that the diversity, the representation of diversity of human behavior in LLMs is very, very low today. And unless we increase it to a reasonable amount, it is difficult to build digital twins of the kind that I was referring to. So this would be the first takeaway from these experiments. But the other takeaway is, and this is for this, the results I'm not showing here, is that using culture as a prior to personalization really helps. What it means is asking questions like which country somebody is from takes us a long way. So this is useful and important. So it's not that these stereotypes are useless, but we have to be mindful that these are stereotypes. So it might be a good starting point for a conversation. Somebody from India might know Hindi, but we all know how big a stereotype this is, right? When we go abroad, we face this all the time. Oh, you are from India, you will speak Indian, and by Indian they mean Hindi. But then soon people have to adjust and learn. Oh, okay, I learned something new about India today. There are many languages that are spoken in India, not only Hindi, and so on and so forth. So once you know somebody very well, once somebody is your friend, you don't care what is their culture anymore. So in other way, what we are observing is essentially this point that every individual is at an intersection of various identities. So imagine there is a set of all researchers and we want to model their behavior, but within them there are healthcare researchers, and within healthcare researchers there are specific set of researchers coming from NIMHANS. So there will be like differences in behavior, knowledge, everything. And knowledge also I'm counting as a behavior, preferences, values, everything. There will be a specific set I can define for NIMHANS as a stereotype, of course, like average behavior. But then somebody is a woman, then there will be a different set of like this person's behavior will not only be modified because they are from NIMHANS and therefore is a healthcare researcher and therefore is also a researcher, but also the fact that they are a woman, or also a fact that they love sports and so on and so forth, right? So in short, every individual has many, many identities or hats that we wear, and cultural knowledge helps identify these broad identities. But after that, you have to keep probing the person to get to the core of their behavior if you want to model. that behavior. So this is my current research direction where I'm trying to build. So there is this social psychology. In social psychology, there is this notion of metacultural awareness. And this is a paradigm where the paradigm is basically about how we understand other cultures that we are not part of through this probing method. It's the probing method is called explication and negotiation. So we are trying to see if in AI systems we can model this. And then through interacting with the individual user, they will understand more and more about their behavior. Okay. With that much of background, and in fact, I don't have, I mean, these are all open research questions. So let me summarize with five, ethical and technical conundrums that in this broader area that I try to, or landscape that I try to chart. So the first problem is, I would say, we want to make the individual, which could be the user for a system, which could be the patient for a or a client, whatever the term you use in your field, front and center, and not their culture. Because a very important, and this is a very subtle ethical point, that culture by very definition entails stereotypes. So, of course, it gives a good starting point, like I said, but the more quickly we start treating somebody as an individual rather than a representative of a culture, the better we start building the bonds and providing service to them. And how to do it is a good technical question. Now, when you start individualizing, two ethical questions come up. One ethical question come up, which is, if you really know every behavior of a person, you can start manipulating them. That's what ad services try to do, or even Facebook feeds try to do. They social media feeds, right? So they know your behavior very well and show things that you will be hooked to, and it causes many other negative things. It increases their revenue because they want users to spend more time on the platform, but it creates other kinds of mental health issues, psychological problems, attention deficit, and so on and so forth, whatnot. So without being manipulative, how to ensure that hyperpersonalization doesn't come with the intent to manipulate? So this is a very important ethical question. From a technical point of view, this is also a new way of, how to describe behavior, a new approach to describing behavior. And especially in your field, it might be very interesting to look at because you deal with how to describe behavior. That's all about psychology, right? How to describe human behavior. The second question is it possible to replicate the relevant behavioral characteristics of a user without compromising privacy? This is a big question, as you can already see, already sense. And there are two broad approaches. I think Vamshi and Asim's talk touched on some of these. So one is trust-based approaches. In trust-based approaches, for instance, when I share my information with a hospital and a doctor, it's a trust-based approach because I trust my doctor and the hospital that they will not share my information with anybody. So we could build such trust-based systems with AI also. The second is algorithmic approaches, which is like, even if the AI system gets compromised, your information will still remain hidden. This is how we do with passwords, for instance, encryptions and other methods. However, encryption methods do not work at scale because they are very expensive, and you cannot run neural networks on encrypted tokens. Like there is a whole group, so Sunena is there, sitting there. So there is a whole group at Microsoft Research India who is specifically working on algorithmic approaches to provide, uh, encryption guarantees or privacy guarantees. So that's a whole other research area. But I think in the short run, trust-based approaches might still work. And we can set up something around it. The third is the subtle balance of the agency between the user, the AI system, and the institutions. Now, this is where this point comes that whether we are building an AI therapist or a human therapist who is supported by AI. And if the human therapist is supported by AI, when does the how much agency does the human therapist have to decline the AI's suggestions, right? So the example I showed, agency was completely with the human therapist. The human therapist could take it, leave it, whatever. But there are other cases, like if LLM itself is the therapist, then the agency goes to the LLM. But then how do you limit its agency? When does the LLM know, when does the system know that, sorry, this is something beyond my expertise and I should go to an expert, I should defer to a human? It could be through rule design, or it could be through, so there are these levels of agencies through rule design, which people have worked in at the intersection of philosophy and AI. And also there is this issue of, again, trust and reliability coupled with agency. So if a system has less agency, typically trust and reliability of the system goes up often. So or in other words, they are all interconnected. This is a more a technical, interesting technical conundrum, but has some ethical issues also, the fourth one, which is that if I learn model a human's behavior, an individual's behavior from one domain, can I generalize to another domain? For instance, I know your movie preferences. Can I predict your food preferences from there? I know your, I know how, let's say, Indians typically behave. Can I use that to learn how Ethiopians typically behave? Sounds very strange when I put it in a cross-cultural context, but there's this whole area of structural anthropology which asks precisely that question, that are there universal patterns that gets repeated? Like in language, we have universal grammar, sort of a paradigm which we can, and we did do see cross-lingual generalization. So if you learn a model very well for English and give it a little bit of Hindi data, it starts doing well on Hindi. So similar things can it happen for culture? And of course, cross individual transfers also. Can I model an individual as a combination of few canonical individuals? Like this person's behavior is more like, when it comes to personality traits, more like A, when it comes to, knowledge, more like B, and so on, and values more like C. So it's a combination of A, B, C. So those kind of mathematical compositionality would make things very easy, but it also brings down humans to algorithms. So that's another ethical question. Like, shall we look at human behavior just as some algorithms? But I think, like it or not, we are going there. It's going to happen. And finally, this came up again and again in the Dutch tool, which is about these protocols and platforms for data sharing. One of the biggest problem, while people are not able to do much in this area, not able to progress much in this area and collaborate much, is because data cannot go or share between institutions. A lot of these hospitals around the world, and I'm sure Nimhans also has data, but you won't have permission to share that data with me or with Sunena, for even for research purpose. For that, we need to come up with these protocols and platforms. And what those would be is a very, very open question. And I think, there are lots of possibilities. And this is something, again, Nimhans, you can also take the lead because you are expert on these issues. Like, I'm talking of not the protocols and platforms, but this issue of why this data is sensitive and what could be worked out and so on. Because if you can share data under certain agreement, I think there are lots of researchers who would be very happy to work on these problems and collaborate and do something really big. And let me summarize my whole idea as what I call Turing Test 2.0. So the whole field of AI, as many of you would know, in 1950s, come up from this quote by Alan Turing. The whole idea of LLMs, rather, I would say, comes from this quote, that we need to build models which can mimic humans. But the way Turing stated it, it's like, can computers imitate any human, any non-specific human? And we have passed it, right? In 2020, it was declared that Turing test 1.0, as I'm putting it, 1.0 has been, computers has now passed it. In fact, ChatGPT has now surpassed, right, human intelligence, non-specific human intelligence and so on. So it's no longer an interesting paradigm to look at. So to me, the more interesting question now is what I call Turing test 2.0. Can computers imitate a specific human? And this is what the digital twin or the personalization questions are. And I will not get into the details here, but there is a solid theoretical framework from machine learning, if we believe on how we define generalization in terms of machine learning, then this should be ideally the way Turing test should be defined, or evaluation paradigm should be defined for LLMs, how well they can imitate specific individuals' behavior. With that, let me thank you all again. It's a work of a lot of people. I would specifically like to call out two people, Shogoto Shaha here and Asim, whom you have just heard, who have been driving. They're both postdocs at MBZUAI. Shogoto is looking at the culturally yours work and more the culture, behavior, personalization aspect. And Asim has been more looking at the mental health, loneliness, and those projects, but also now started looking at personalization. And of course, many other people, including Vamshi and others. So with that, let me close and to circle back, let me introduce Ruth's father to you. So Ruth is my son. I changed the name and of course the photo, but that's a real lived experience that I try to describe you. Okay, thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Monojit, I think I mean your talk was exceptionally relevant to our discussion today, relevant to some of the work that's being done here, and your paintings are amazing as well. I mean, I cannot stress that enough. I would like to see if there are any online questions.
There is one indeed. Come on.
It was
Okay.
yeah.
So there's one doctor. Hi, Monojit, Lekhansh here. We have been corresponding over email. Hi.
Hi, Lekhansh.
There's one question from Dr. Masood ul Hakwani, who says large language models cannot accurately and equitably reproduce diverse human behavior due to fundamental limitations in their training. They lack lived experience, they lack intrinsic motivations, and a lot of other attributes which are part of human life and suffering. So, I mean, it's a very philosophical question, I suppose. But then how do you respond to that?
So that's a great question, right? And this is the starting premise of our work, that large language models will never be, the way they are designed, will never be able to replicate human behavior fully. So there are two parts. I will try to answer the question in two parts. One is, when we say behavioral replication, what do we mean formally, mathematically? And if we mean it will be like a digital twin in the real sense, that there will be a clone who will do everything that I do and all, I don't know in near future or far future this is possible or not, but at least at the moment, that's not what we are talking about. So when we are talking about replication, we are only talking of replication of a certain behavior which is useful, or understanding of a certain behavior which has a utility. In the specific case of therapy, as I said, it is the, it is certain behavioral patterns which a therapist would look for. And if the therapy is given to the twin, digital twin, the changes that you expect in those particular behavior, the twin will also have those changes. So that's probably, and as we speak, we are working on this formal model, like the definition of this formal model. That's one part. But the other part is also, right, even think of humans, right? Can we replicate another human's behavior? Not at all. Not at all. So we are also fundamentally limited, but we know how to still interpret others, right? And how to contextualize others' behavior. It works in multiple levels. So one is, of course, theory of mind, through which we can attribute other person with intention, motivation, because I have intention, so I know the other person also has intention. And then there are these very subtle ways of observation and probing. My favorite example, and this happens with Indians a lot. So In Indian languages, we have these ap, tum, tu, three levels of addressing a person. Usually, there is a norm, right? If I talk to somebody for the first time and the person is like an adult, I will typically refer using ap. But then, although there are variations to this, but then when we get friends, we negotiate and come to tum and sometimes to tu, and that can happen over one conversation or maybe three, four conversations, but it happens very often. And if you see that negotiation, that's very interesting. As a linguist, I observed that like how we hesitate first. Sometimes somebody would do a slip, and then other person, no, 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 okay, you can call me tum, no problem. So that's the process we want to replicate in the behavior of LLMs also, or AI systems also, that negotiation and explication.
Right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a converse to this question and slightly larger.
Is it audible there, sir? Manojit?
Yes, I can hear.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Mr. I think Pochunaina, and see, I'm also thinking about the converse of this, with all this AI training and I think access to AI. I mean, even people who do not know what AI is, the moment you have your regular apps on your phone, but still, and most of these apps work on. What is the possibility of the homogenization of culture, which is why I called converse, because of LLMs? And that for me is more scary.
So that's my favorite point of discussion. Like we have been debating this a lot, right? Like this comes in linguistics also. So there is homogenization right now today because of historical reasons. Half of the world speaks English, even though not as their mother tongue, but they understand and speak English. So and in India, right, Bollywood, for instance, has a great homogenization effect on Indian culture, and we can already see. So it's not only like technology, but other factors that homogenize. Now, the point is like, if you look at anthropology literature, what they say is there's a term for it, which I'm not recollecting at the moment. Basically, integration and diversification. Integration and diversification. What is as soon as you homogenize at one level, you start diversifying at another level because humans always crave for identity, us versus them. And there is always this feeling of community. So once you define a community, even in, let's say, in complexes in Bangalore, right? Housing complexes, each complex will try to do something differently to create a community sense of community from another complex and so on. And so human behavior will never be homogenized to a point that everybody is behaving like LLMs exactly the same way. There'll be always diversity, but certain levels will be homogenized. And I totally believe that, I hear you when you say, let's say, wedding rituals will get homogenized, music taste will get homogenized, probably to certain extent. These specific pockets of, let's say, folk music, like I also work on music. So we see many musical instruments, many folk music styles and all are getting extinct or less popular. But then newer genres also are coming up, right? Different types of hip hops, different types of pops. So it's not a complete homogenization, I think, is impossible. But yes, at certain levels, things will homogenize.
Just to say, add on to that, the problem why I find it scary is because this carries hegemony, the existing hegemonies are carried along with that. This, whatever level of homogenization you're talking about, hegemonies remain intact. So that's why it is scary, and that's the reaction. That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. No, I mean, the hegemonies take a much longer time to get rid of, right? Overcome.
At all. The problem is when homogenization happens, but the hegemonies also remain intact.
And they always remain, they always remain. Like, look at colonialism. So, I mean, as we say, we still carry those, lot of those things which come from colonial past, even though I was not even born in British India. None of us probably were born in British India, but we still have that, we carry that thing. So it will take much longer time to homogenize.
Right, sir. I had a bit of a technical question. Why are we not able to crack this problem of, a long horizon reward in a multi-turn conversation? Because it may be the case of emulating a therapist or a client. In both cases, it's a question of how long can a very deeply defined persona be carried. And therefore, we have to reward the behavior over many turns of conversation. And as you in your talk said, that we are still stuck at one turn or two turn. So, I mean, are you seeing any computational breakthroughs or any fundamental breakthroughs in being able to get beyond this?
So the main challenge of multi-turn conversation evaluation is the reward model itself. For instance, if I ask one single turn question, I know what the answer I'm expecting, and I can match against that answer. But if it's a multi-turn conversation, it's not a single answer that I'm looking for, but certain state changes that I'm looking for. Now, what are those states, and what is the ideal direction of change? In fact, if you think of therapy specifically, we want to have a change in the emotional states and other kinds of mental states and track them over time. So coming up with that, first of all, coming up with that paradigm, right? Like what those states will be, how to measure those is not there yet. So it's not a fundamental limitation. We should be able to do it, but yeah, we don't have it yet. So people have to work on it. The other problem is, the problem of combinatorial explosion. So if you think of all conversations starting with one particular ask, it can go in probably infinitely many ways. And if you have references to track or measure it against, then those references will represent only a very, very small subset of good ones. But it's not that everything else is bad. Many of the other ones which is not there, it's also, it has been a traditionally also a problem of a machine translation. So when you are evaluating whether the translation is correct, since a sentence can be translated in probably infinitely many correct ways, so you can only get a rough estimate of how good it is from a reference or a set of references. Fortunately, how LLMs solve this is because they represent meaning beyond sequences. It's no longer the sequence of the words, but in embedding space, they represent meaning. So we can now do LLM as a judge, and it works quite well for machine translation. So similarly, people are thinking of LLMs as judge for multi-turn conversation. However, there is a chicken and egg problem, because for machine translation, at least there are ground truths against which we can compare. Here, there are no ground truth, and we are trusting the LLM without any further ground for that. So that's what people are struggling with. So coming up with at least some ground truths against which we can measure. Otherwise, of course, there is human judgment, but human judgment is very, very expensive always.
Right. Thank you.
I have one question. Thank you, Monojit, and it was a wonderful talk and very beautiful paintings. And thanks for your sharing your lived experience. So I have two questions. One, as you rightly mentioned about human therapy supported by AI, and recently one Grand Challenge Canada review, I was reviewing one proposal where they are working in school, government schools, where children are expected to who have a distress or mental health conditions, they have to solve the workbook, and workbook is through that one chatbot, that what is it called? Visa. And and it is also supported by the counselor, school counselor. So, but here our assumption is that the therapists know well, but that is also very much, and therapists generally gain the information and knowledge from the AI. So it is a vicious cycle coming on. So how to check that? That is my one question. And second is there possibility of a group chat? Like on WhatsApp, we have multiple, in one group, there are 10 people chatting. So in AI, is there some system, or is it existing, or is it future, like 3, 4 chatbots and I am, or my 3 friends and one chatbot, we are 4 conversing each other?
So the second question is easier to answer. So it is absolutely possible. We call these multi-agent systems. So there are a whole lot of, I mean, you can put as many agents as you want and talk to each other. And there are a lot of benefits of that also. So sometimes, for instance, one in the example that I was showing of book reviews, instead of asking only one model to simulate, if you ask multiple models to simulate, at least the diversity will increase. Even though the models agree, but they don't agree 100%, they agree only 50%. So remaining 50% is still diverse. So the diversity will improve. So that's one benefit. The other benefit is often you can use, you can make different agents which are good at different things. So one agent could be very good at, let's say, measuring. This is going back to D. Young's work. So they have built a bunch of agents, each good at evaluating certain aspects of the conversation. And when they are giving feedback to user, to the therapist on their conversation, so various things, different agents would flag different things, and then you can do a majority voting and things like that. So that's a very useful paradigm and is being already used. The other question that you asked was about
Therapist and AI, the
right.
inputs therapist is also getting from the AI, and how he can use his judgment if he has not very good training and all these things. How we believe that he is correct. Then
Right. So okay, so this is a very interesting question, because it goes back to uh, this point of also to this point of, like it or not, it is happening. Like you said, in Canada, it's already happening. And some of the work, again, D. Young's work, the randomized control trial that they did at large scale, showed that AI trainers were better than human trainers in certain aspects. So the particular aspect was, if I remember correctly, it was empathy. So when it comes to identifying whether the human trainer is being empathetic or not, or asking the right questions or not, the AI therapist was better. AI, not therapist, therapist trainer was better. But I forgot exactly what was its problem. There was, yeah, effectiveness. So when it comes to measuring effectiveness, it was worse than a human, therapist. So again, local context like empathy in this conversation turn and all, locally, I think they are very good. But globally, is it getting effective or not? They are not yet there. Now, that doesn't answer your question, though. It just is like adding one further layer of caution that we should not trust it blindly. I think what is needed, I mean, the main problem of AI is policies are evolving much slower than the technology. And policies have to evolve very fast on what should be allowed and shouldn't be allowed. I think that's the biggest problem. And in mental health, I don't know if there is any specific policy yet on AI. I haven't seen any.
Right.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our participants online and offline. We